All right, so today I'm going to do something a little bit different. I've wanted to actually do this for a while. I wanted to sit down and have a chat with other detransitioned lesbians because I think we don't necessarily get some of the spotlight that other people get. And I think it's really important that we talk about our experiences. And today I'm going to be chatting with Casey, and you probably know her from around. Thank you for coming on and talking to me on my channel, though. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Anytime. I was really excited when you suggested this as an idea, and especially as another detrans lesbian, being able to talk to somebody like me and not just, a bunch of straight people with a hyperfixation on detransitioners.
Yeah, that's another thing too. And so that's that's one of the reasons, is because we're lesbians, and I want to talk about and kind of frame this and position this to lesbians too. Like that's kind of it's the audience I've tried to pick up anyways. And I think we have a lot to say. And the reason I think it's going to be an interesting conversation is because we have quite a few years between us. I'm 43 right now, and you're 22.
22.
So, and you started your transition as what, 17, right?
Yeah, in 2017,
Okay.
at 17 years old.
At 17 years old. I started my transition at 34. Um, Yet when we started talking with each other, we discovered that we had so many similarities as to why we transitioned, like the causes, the reasons, the driving force, that I just was like, I mean, it's something I've kind of known for a while, that the transitioning of lesbians, or the reason we transition, is, in my opinion, based in internalized homophobia, external homophobia, and also just sexism that we face in the world. And most of us are gender nonconforming lesbians too, or butch. And I noticed this trend, and I noticed that it seemed to go across the board of every age. But it seems like so much of the talk around transition and detransition does focus on the underage. But I think for lesbians, it might be a little different. I think it might span the generations, because I think there's a big homophobic base to it.
Absolutely. And that's something that I've noticed as well, kind of interacting with my generational, the Gen Z transitioners, is that most of their motivations for transitioning, a lot of times people don't blame it on the homophobia. They'll say, oh, it was autism, undiagnosed personality disorder, social contagion, maybe a history of trauma. It was a lot of things, but a lot of focus on like social contagion, social media, um, and kind of de-emphasizing the homophobia thing. But I actually find I have a lot more in common with some of the older detransitioners and detrans lesbians. I think this is why it was really interesting to talk with you and some other, what is it, Gen Y millennials, transitioners, detransitioners, and to hear that my story actually overlapped a lot more with, the generations before me than it did my own generation. Because of homophobia, but because, some of the people I'm talking to in Gen Z are either straight or bi, they're very effeminate, like talking about the trans women specifically. They're very plugged into social media, like, maybe they had support, they didn't have support. Like they had like one kind of stereotype that it seems that a lot of people are talking about, like the rapid onset gender dysphoria and the social contagion piece or the autism angle. But like even though I'm the same age as them, I just can't relate because that wasn't my experience at all. And the way that I even came to transition was very different than a lot of the people in my cohort. So that's why I think conversations like these are really illuminating as well, because anytime that I'm sure you say, it's homophobia, people are transitioning because of homophobia, they don't listen to you. And then when I say it in isolation, like, yeah, it's still a thing. Like, like homophobia is still a thing that kids and teens, gay and lesbian kids and teens, still go through in certain areas of the country. They don't believe me, or that it's the same. But I think this conversation will hopefully illuminate some people, of like the stark similarities between
Yeah.
our stories,
Yeah.
despite the fact that we have over 20 years difference.
Yeah. I wasn't going to do the math, but I knew it was like at least 2 decades. Um, and now, not to talk too much about it, but we are both in a private group that's intergenerational for lesbians, right? And
Mhm.
I think even though a lot of these lesbians never transitioned and never were trans identified, we do share a lot of similarities across generations either. And when you start to talk to other lesbians who are of different ages and their experiences, I find that our histories are all very similar anyways. Like we all face pretty similar homophobia, especially, those of us who were tomboys and weren't fitting the mold we were expected to fit very young. Have you found that to be true too when you just talk to just other lesbians about this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I haven't talked too much to like non-detrans lesbians, a little bit, like I've talked to some of them, but like a lot of the circumstances are like near identical in terms of our upbringing and maybe some gender nonconformity and understanding our sexualities and like timelines of that. It's interesting because again, like in my generation, like I had access to stuff that said this made you trans, whereas, in older generations, it was, oh, you're a dyke. Like,
Yeah,
oh, am I allowed
you
to say
didn't.
that on YouTube?
What? I don't see why not. I
Oh,
say,
well,
I
I
say,
just didn't.
I say horrible stuff on YouTube. I have no
Okay, it's fine.
instance. YouTube hasn't spanked me yet, so I don't know.
Oh, okay, it's fine. It's just but it's because the stuff is the same. The content is the same. Like the experiences are the same, even for people that didn't transition.
So another thing with both of our backgrounds is we both came from evangelical religious upbringing
Yeah.
in the good old American church. I feel like American church is very different than like other churches from different, like, okay, so if you take the UK people don't get how like off the chain some of our religious sects over here can get. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, no,
Mhm.
you don't understand. Some of these people are like super invested in their
They
religion.
are crazy for Jesus.
They're very much so. But so we grew up in that similar background. And another thing that took me a little bit by surprise, which shouldn't, was, as I started to meet you younger detransitioners and talk to you and stuff, we all seem to have very similar backgrounds of being raised in the church. And so much homophobia coming from that, and sexism, coming from the church, that just seemed to lay the groundwork for a lot of self-hate. I mean, it did for me.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, it was not a fun time while I was in the church, and it wasn't a fun time for years even after I left. And it's stuff that I still deal with to this day.
It's kind of like the church is timeless.
It is. Jesus is still in my heart, and I really don't want him to be. He needed to be evicted years ago. He is squatting.
Oh no, Jesus, get the hell out of there. No, but it's true. Like, I was in the church. I was getting the shit in church when it was in the 80s and in the early 90s. But it's exactly the same. Your experience when you were talking about stuff you experienced in the church, exactly the same. So no, like maybe other places have gotten better, but like in a lot of parts of the country and in a lot of churches, it's still just as damn bad as it was 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because like I kind of live in like a conservative and moderate area. So like there's some pockets that are kind of okay, and then there's like tiny pockets that are super woke, but then there's also other pockets that are really conservative. And we just happen to be at like the most conservative church within our area, literally the most conservative one, to the point where like you tell other churches that you go to that church and they go, oh, you go there. I'm like, yep, that's where I go.
Yeah.
Um but it's still, I mean, there's still, they're probably still dime a dozen in this area, or like, in this region in the state. I'm in Pennsylvania, so I'm on the East Coast.
Yeah. I mean, I was born and raised in California. These churches are in California. Like California is not a liberal, you know, utopia like people might think it is. Speaking of liberal, I've since I could vote, I've voted Democrat. I've always considered myself a progressive, a lefty. And this whole experience has been really difficult for me because it seems like the left has just completely gone to the just I don't know. The left reminds me of what the right was doing 20 some years ago when they would shut down conversation and lie about stuff and screw with the media and all this kind of stuff. And I remember us on the left used to be like, oh, that's not fair, we should be able to talk about everything, nothing should be censored, and very much about not censoring things. And then now it's like the left is doing that exact same thing. And as a lesbian who experienced homophobia and who got into transition based on that homophobia, it's like I can't even go to my own LGBT community and talk about it because I mean, I've been called right wing so many times, I don't even know, and I'm not. And it's super frustrating that the left won't even talk about any of this stuff. Only the right's talking about it because it helps them. Like, it's not, but it's like, why isn't the left talking about this? Because most of us are on the left. Do you consider yourself a right, a left, or?
So in high school, I was definitely more right leaning, but that was because of my upbringing. And also I did go to a conservative high school. Like, you know, our history teachers, I was pretty involved in the history department, but like they, like the one had like a picture of him and Ronald Reagan riding a pterodactyl in the apocalypse because he absolutely loved Reagan, and they loved conservatism, and it, you know, that was, you know, America's the greatest country in the world, and you know, like we are a Judeo-Christian country with
Oh
like
yeah.
family-based values, and like that was my history class. That was, you know, kind of also part of my upbringing. So I considered myself more right-leaning, but now as I'm sorting myself out, I'm pretty sure I'm on the left. I'm pretty sure I align more with left ideals.
All right. Sorry with all the fiddling. God damn it. I'll probably edit this part out.
Come on, Carol.
I know. How unprofessional is this
Yeah, you're
shit?
just come on. You're supposed to be. You've been doing this longer than me. Come on.
Where is, okay, that's the right one. That's the right one. Oh, yeah. Well, you don't understand. I live with a woman who is practically a pack rat. So this little niche looks somewhat okay, but if you looked around the rest of this room, it wouldn't be good. But I've learned to accept her for who she is, and there's only so much I can change. I give the rest to Jesus. So far, Jesus hasn't cleaned up shit. Anyway, sorry about all that. I had to plug the computer in. I thought it was plugged in. It got unplugged because she plugged something else in. Okay. Sorry. So you can, so you consider yourself left though, progressive.
Yeah.
You don't, you know, you're not on the right, right?
No, I'm not. I'm
You're very
appalled by it.
stereotypical lesbian.
I am, unfortunately. You
Look,
know,
even your shirt screams lesbian.
look, the only thing that could make it more lesbian is if I was wearing a U-Haul hat and I had a cardigan.
Well, you need more polo shirts, or maybe that's an older lesbian thing.
True. I think that's an older lesbian. It's not like a younger lesbian thing. See, this
No.
is so lesbian of me. I follow mask lesbian fashion pages to dress myself.
Oh, how? Yes.
And that the young kids don't wear polos.
It's, yeah, it is. It's a middle-aged lesbian thing. It's okay. I'll keep it alive.
I mean, I know I'm secretly a geriatric. I have a geriatric soul, but not quite there yet, wardrobe wise.
I do like a button down too. It's just a little bit harder to fit me. So I don't have the real slim figure, and men's button downs don't like curvy figures. So
yeah, no,
that's why
don't.
I go with polos a lot. Yeah. So do you find it frustrating when you're having a conversation about trans, detrans stuff or LGBT stuff or anything like that around the conversation of left, right, center? What's been your experience in this?
Okay, so for anybody that doesn't know how I entered this space, I was a dumbass and I made a video in my car after getting my head buzzed because I was not detransitioning yet. I was still trans man, whatever. And I basically was like, yeah, like I have, you know, pretty bad hair loss, which actually it's gotten a lot better. It's gotten a lot better. But like, you know, I have pretty bad hair loss, deeper voice, facial hair, permanent masculinization, which I thought was permanent. And I'm like, I don't see how I could detransition. And then it just blew up and it hit conservative Twitter really hard. And it was like a moment. It was a moment in time. Like it ended up on Tucker Carlson and like it was a thing. And then
it did.
Yeah, it ended up on Tucker Carlson.
God.
And like I got people tweeting at me because this was on Twitter. I was on Twitter.
Oh shit.
Like literally on Twitter for a week, and then I just went viral. But like people were like, oh, I saw you on Tucker. And I'm like, I wasn't on fucking Tucker. What are you talking about? And then I found the clip and I was like, holy crap. Like they just got put on there. But that was the whole thing. And then like trans activists basically dogpiled me and called me a bunch of horrible names and tried to bully me into submission. And then that's kind of where I got the start. And I got a lot of like right-wing media attention and they wanted to interview me and talk to me. And I basically was like, no. Like, I don't want to, because even though I couldn't dictate it at the time, I knew something was wrong. And I knew that as a lesbian and as a gender nonconforming lesbian, that my situation would be weaponized against me and my community, even though I was kind of in like self-defense mode because I was like basically just realized I had made one of the worst decisions in my entire life and LARPed as a man for 5 years, and that was not very productive. But I was with it enough to know that like their values didn't align with mine and that this would come back to bite me. And I had people saying, oh, they're not going to misuse lesbians. Like, we need more lesbians stepping forward and talking about this. But I'm like, sure as hell ain't going to be on the right.
Mhm.
And anytime I've tried to interact with certain right-wing media outlets or do interviews, it probably didn't progress into like stories or actual videos. They've always told me to downplay the homophobia and talk only about the sexual assault.
Oh, interesting.
And there was a time period where I met with people in my state who were working with legislators to pass legislation. They were right-wing organizations, and they basically told me that I couldn't talk about the homophobia. I couldn't talk about the fact that I was gay if I was going to work with them. To which I'm like, that's like a solid half of why I transitioned. Like,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
but I ultimately I decided not to work with them just because I was like, this is just like there's all kinds of wrong. And they also told me like, we understand you don't want to be taken advantage of, but we're going to do what we need to do to get these laws passed. And if we hurt you and anybody else, so be it. Which I'm like, okay, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. I'm not going to work with you.
Hey, but you know what? Props for honesty. You know
It's
what I mean?
very true.
Like,
Yeah.
props for
So
honesty.
yeah, but so like that's been my experience with the right, and or like just on Twitter or like in comments and so on. I talk about like one of my most recent videos where I was like, we're in need of a paradigm shift. And I'm like, we need to talk about the societal issues of why people transition. And, one of them is homophobia and religious homophobia, having been raised as an evangelical Christian. And there are a bunch of people in my comments basically telling me that it wasn't the church's fault, it was still the trans cult, or that homophobia doesn't exist, that it doesn't
No, it just
exist
doesn't
anymore.
exist. It just
It's
went
not
away.
real.
Poof.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is completely missing point. So that's my interactions with the right. I'm starting ever so slowly to have conversations in real life with people who are either centrist or left leaning. And depending on how you approach it, it's going a little bit better, but they're not directly shutting me down. They're not, telling me that Jesus is going to save me or that it's not the church's fault or jumping to extremes. But yeah, my experiences with the right have just been more homophobia, honestly, and just
Yeah.
like straight out denial that they had anything to do with us.
And it's funny, I've turned down a lot of stuff from the right. And I've done it because I'm a lesbian and I have a whole goddamn history. I was alive to remember, like, unlike you who didn't have the experience of it, I actually lived through the whole fight over gay marriage. And even before that, I remember just the kind of treatment we got and the legal rights we didn't have. I remember, when me and my wife were first together, marriage was not legal. We could not legally take care of each other, and she ended up in the hospital. And the hospital refused to talk to me. It was even hard to get in to see her because I wasn't family. And her mom, luckily, her mom's supportive. And so her mom went in there and they would kept trying to ask the mom all the questions. And finally her mom's like, that's her wife. She called, because we considered each other married anyways. She's like, that's her wife. That's who's going to make the decisions. Talk to her. And they still kind of didn't, and that it's so hard to like go through that and then, walk past when the whole gay marriage thing was being debated in California. It was hard to then walk past all of the protesters from all the local churches holding these signs and just, losing their goddamn minds because you wanted to get married. And it was just walking on campus I was in community college, walking on campus and seeing so many students that I had classes with wearing stickers basically saying, gay marriage should, no on gay marriage. Marriage is between a man and woman, and I'm just like, wow, I didn't realize so many people don't think I deserve equality under the law, because that's what it was about. It was not about having a party. It wasn't about getting married in the church, although some gays and lesbians did take it too far and demanding churches. I don't believe you should mandate churches do anything they don't want to do.
Neither do I.
No, like absolutely not. Like, you have your beliefs, fine. I'm totally down with that. But under the law and the state and the government, I should be able to have equal rights and equal access to stuff that heterosexual couples have, because I am also building a life. even though my partner is the same sex as me. That's what it was about. And I remember how much hate, how much like just horrible stuff the right threw at us, you know. And I remember as a kid how horrible the right was, and the Christian right was, going state to state, trying to get teachers fired who were gay. Like, I know this stuff. So it's like these people who come in here and say, well, the right's not like that anymore. Oh, they're much more open to gay people. I'm like, yeah, but you know what? It's only been about 20 years, maybe. I'm sorry, but why should I just completely forget everything I experienced with the right and the Christian right, and jump on that side? Like, why aren't you guys recognizing the like fucking trauma that so many homosexuals went through because of these people thinking that the government had to mandate their religion? Because that's what it came down to. Everybody could have their own beliefs in their own household and in their own community, but when it comes to the government and laws, your religion doesn't trump shit. And that's what they wanted. They wanted their religious beliefs to trump just equality.
Well, in some respects, it kind of seems a little bit evangelical, the idea that you have to forgive your abuser just as God forgives them. Oh, well, they've changed, they've accepted Jesus Christ into their heart. They're not the same anymore. I know that they were bad for 20 years, but, like God has really worked in their lives and changed them. You can trust them again. That's what it sounds like to me.
And of course, I'm heartbroken over the way the left's gone. Absolutely. At this point, I stand in the middle and go, Dad, they're both ridiculous.
Yeah,
that's
honestly where I'm at.
And I honestly think the vast majority of Americans are not on either side of the extreme. The side that is out, both sides have their little horns out and saying some really crazy shit. And I think most people are in the middle somewhere, and they're not on either side of this. And I hope that us middle people come out ahead eventually and go like, you know what? Gay marriage is okay, but like transitioning children and mandating people use certain language is not okay. So how about we all agree to like knock it off?
Yeah, and just like be a little bit rational, use our minds for once, engage in a little bit of critical thinking.
Yeah, I always really thought that like one of the core values or like core beliefs of being a progressive and a more liberal-minded person was having an open mind and taking in more science-based information, taking in information you didn't like, but you would listen to it, right? You would critically think about it. And I feel like that has completely been lost.
Oh, absolutely. And even like I can remember years and years and years ago, when I was in early middle high school, that even seemed like what the left was like anyways. Like they weren't, aggressively shutting down debate. And now the left that I see, I mean, what little bits I see of the left today on social media and reading stuff, I'm like, this isn't even what I knew in high school. Like, it just like there's no debate. Both sides are buckling or, doubling down. They're both digging their heels in and just getting more aggressive. But like, this is not how change is made. This is how you kind of start a war. It's just two people being bullheaded.
And I see so many similarities between the evangelical right I grew up in and the trans rights advocates
Absolutely. It's the
they
same
are
thing.
the
It's literally the same
same
thing.
group of people, basically.
Like I will be talking to people or talking to somebody, and like there were some conversations I had where we were just kind of bouncing ideas back and forth because she didn't really come from like a super religious background. Of course, I was raised evangelical Christian, talking about her experiences with like trans rights activists and all of that stuff. And I'm just like, that just sounds like evangelical Christians to me. She's like, what? I'm like, yeah, it literally. And I explained, like, I gave an example of like, what the church would do, what people in the church would do. And it was like, oh my God. And it was, kind of like the synapses connecting of it's the same thing. No wonder I hopped from one extreme to the other because it's the same environment.
And I think that's something I noticed too in hindsight. It's like I feel like I was primed. I was already primed to jump into another magical belief system because I grew up in a magical belief system. Mm-hmm. And if you can believe things that cannot be proven by science, and if you believe things based on feelings alone, and if you feel something and you interpret it a certain way and that way is the correct way, like I remember, like the whole you can feel the spirit of God, or you can feel the spirit
Oh
of
God, the
Jesus, or
Holy Spirit. I knew,
that
I
that
was like, is
whole
she going to mention the Holy
the Holy
Spirit?
Spirit.
Because
Yes, that whole thing, right?
yeah,
Okay, so that's very similar to feeling gender, feeling euphoria, feeling
yeah,
dysphoria, like
I jokingly say that like I thought I had a man soul, like the soul of a man trapped in a woman's body, or the brain of a man trapped in a woman's body, but I call it my man soul. And that like I went to a therapist, and the therapist was like my oracle, and she was like, I am interpreting the signs. Yes, you do have a man soul. And I'm like, this is like when the church told me that the Holy Spirit was literally inside of me and was my
yeah.
moral compass dictating right and wrong, and that I could feel it, if I did something wrong, and I had that guilty not feeling because I thought Jesus was watching me or God was watching me, that was actually the Holy Spirit. It was a literal spirit inside of me. And I'm like, it's the same thing. It's literally the same thing. Well, not literally, but pretty much the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, I've compared gender with soul many times. It is the same thing, right? It's the magic gender thing that is different than your actual biological sex is no different than the belief in a soul or spirit. Neither have any scientific proof, as much as they want to try to bring science into it when it's not, which is funny because the evangelical right also does that, right? They bring in science to prove that the
Oh,
flood
Ken
happened,
Ham.
and
Oh, Ken Ham. Oh, I went to
if
a
anybody
Christian
wants to know
school.
how
Oh
similar this
man.
is, Ken Ham, right?
Yeah, Ken Ham,
Yeah.
creationist, has a whole freaking museum either in Kentucky or Tennessee, one of those two states, somewhere in the Bible Belt. He did a debate with Bill Nye to debate evolutionism versus creationism. And like Bill Nye would give like his scientific proof and like carbon dating and all of that stuff. And then Cam Hand would be like, well, the Bible doesn't say that. And Bill Nye's, well, like, can you prove the Bible? And he's like, well, I have these cherry picked like pieces of proof, but also it's true because God wrote it. And Bill's like, that's not, it's not verifiable. Like that doesn't prove it. And then Ken Ham's like, I won this debate because God. And I'm like, this is so stupid. But like my school, the Christian school I was at, they broadcasted it. We studied it in science class. My youth pastor thought it was the greatest thing in the world.
Oh
Our
my
church
God.
took like trips down to the Creation Museum, which I have not had the pleasure of going to.
You didn't get to go? Oh, what a missed
No, I didn't.
opportunity.
Well, it was all geriatrics going down, and even though I identify as geriatrics sometimes, um, I was like, that's too much. A 10-hour car ride down to this Bible Belt to go look at a museum with a bunch of old people is a little too much for me. I have to draw the line somewhere.
Somewhere.
But yeah, but like, oh, like even in science class, it was like, okay, like the flash flooding and like the way the certain floods happen in the Grand Canyon was proof that the Great Flood happened, and that like there was just like certain things like about apologetics, which is like I think the ability or the study of trying to prove the Bible to be true.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and like them pulling like pseudoscientific proof just out of their asses to be like, see, this is why the Bible is true. And even if it's not true, all of evolutionary science is a lie by Satan, and you can't trust it. It's
Mm.
bad science.
It's kind of like how if you don't agree with this, you're a bigot.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's not an argument. Like, they want to actually have a discussion about some very serious things. Um, you know, medicalizing people is a very serious thing. And these are not little interventions. These are major medical interventions that have repercussions for the rest of your life. I say that my body was permanently altered within a month of taking tea. So it was. There's parts of my body that will never be the way it was before. And the just like flippancy with the way that was handled by the medical field and by the therapist. My therapist literally said, just try it and see if you like it. If you like it, it means you're really trans and you're meant to have it. This is a professional saying this. And doctors weren't saying, they were saying something not too far off too. You're just like, really? But it is a drug. So like,
Yeah, well, actually, this is really interesting. So back earlier on Twitter, I was talking about like they were saying, oh, testosterone is fine. You can just try it for a couple months, come off, you'll reverse. And I said no. Within a week, my voice started dropping, which they were like, that's not
yeah,
physically possible. But
no, it
it did.
absolutely is. It
Like,
does.
and I within 6 months, my voice was unrecognizable. I had a lot of physical changes just within the first couple of months. And I had a doctor that worked with a telehealth company that prescribes hormone therapy to people say, first of all, this person is lying. And second of all, the changes are absolutely reversible. If you're only on it for a couple months, you can come off and you'll be back to normal.
But back
A
to what
medical
normal?
doctor, I guess baseline, like pre-T,
Do
pre-hormone.
do they not understand that the clitoris is enlarged within a couple weeks?
No, they don't.
Does
They
that
don't
not
think it's
matter?
possible. They don't think it's possible.
I'm here to say it's absolutely possible.
It is absolutely possible because but it's interesting because like I've watched videos, of course, because I watch videos ad nauseum when I was like, coming out and like had my trans epiphany and all of that stuff. I researched the shit out of this, of people talking about the bottom growth. Some people, it's right
Yeah.
away.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah, and
like
that's the other
it's
thing.
it's
Why are
fine
they
if they say it. It's fine if they say it, and it's believable if they say it. But then if a detransitioner says it, it's wrong. It's false. They're
that is
making it up.
interesting, right? Because like they sit there and lie, but all you have to do is just go watch all the FTM stuff. They'll say the same
Absolutely.
thing we're saying, except so far they're saying they're fine with it. You know what I mean? But like it's the same. We were in the system, not lying about the system. And don't tell me it's hard to get this stuff. I was there. In California, places vary. I'm not saying they don't.
Mhm.
But it's not hard to get. So I wanna talk a little bit more, if you're okay with it, talk a little bit more deeply about the kind of homophobia you experienced, because I think it's important to talk about this, especially when I want to make the point to lesbians and to other gay people out there that homophobia in my experience, and I think in your experience as well, was a real driving force for transitioning. And if we don't acknowledge that, like, what are we doing as gay folks, right? We fought for decades to get equality and been seen as whole humans just as we are. But now so many of us are transitioning because we don't feel like we're normal. We don't feel like we're right. We feel like we're wrong. So I wanted to talk about that. So you can jump in if you want. Give me just like a little bit of background or some main points that you feel like was a real hit to you.
So interestingly enough, I kind of waffle in my head if people around me knew that I was gay or not. I mean, I definitely was pretty gender non-conforming as much as I could be, shopping in the women's section, and I had shoulder length hair. I wasn't allowed to get my hair cut short. And originally that was because my mom was like, oh, well, women don't have short hair, which is ironic because she has hair about as short as mine is right now. And she always has for like 20 plus years. And all the
Interesting.
women in her family have short hair. And later on, she did tell me that like I wanted to cut it after I told her I was a lesbian at 15, and she said she didn't let me because she didn't want me signaling it to the world. Because I was already very gender neutral. I'm not sure if my church knew that I was gay. I don't think they did because I wasn't exclusively targeted. And like some of my peers knew that I was gay, but a lot of the messaging that I received was just like general atmospheric homophobia. Like it wasn't specifically targeted mostly at me, except for a couple of people. But even so, it still had a dramatic impact. So like I did experience some in school, but I was also with like a lot of people that just didn't care, or they would make like odd remarks, but most of it was in the church. And like the worst of it, like our main pastor was fine, but a lot of it was in like the youth program as well. So like Wednesday night youth group. And we had a pretty extreme youth pastor who was extremely focused on evangelism. Like literally, we would get like the life books, which is like excerpts from the gospel. We would get those every so often. He would hand them to us, and he basically said, "All right, I want you guys to go to school, and I want you to give these to your friends, and I want you to practice evangelizing to them."
Oh,
And
tracks. Did you call them tracks, or you don't call them tracks anymore?
no, we didn't call them tracks because they
That's
were
what
like
we
little
used.
books.
That's what we used to do.
Mm.
They were just like little pamphlets, and you go up and be like, "Have you accepted Jesus into your heart?" or whatever.
Yeah, but like, we were supposed to talk to our friends, and essentially he was like, and if you don't do this, you actually hate your friends. And if they die tomorrow and they go to hell because you did not intervene and tell them the good news, their blood is on your hands and you will have to reckon to that. And I was told this as like a 12-year-old, mind you. And also like while I was at a Christian school. So I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to go evangelize to my Christian peers at a Christian school. And then when I went to public school, they're like, all right, public school kids, here's your life books. Here's your Gideon Bibles. Go out and, save all your friends. And I tried at first as a freshman, and they were all just like, shut up. Like, this is not going to go anywhere. So then fun fact, I actually had a Mormon friend who would have to do the same thing because like her parents wanted her to like go evangelize her peers. So she would give me a Book of Mormon and I would give her my life books.
Oh God.
So we would exchange
You're
it
like,
because
trade. Trade.
Yeah, trade, exactly. And luckily she got out as well because she was in like a really like abusive environment, both in the church and at home religiously as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it was a really intense youth program, very focused on evangelism, also very heavy on like, for lack of a better term, thought crime. So like thinking about a sin is the same thing as actually doing that sin. So if
I
you think about committing adultery, it is the same thing as committing adultery. So you're always a sinner, you're always evil, you're
thought
always wrong,
crime.
you're always having to ask for forgiveness.
Thought crime doesn't sound familiar at all, does it? It's the trans stuff is the same way.
No,
There's thought
literally,
crime
yeah.
in there, you know.
Well, no, absolutely. I have to reread 1984 because I want to understand it more, but like, yeah, stuff like that. But then like the main messaging was, and I think they were just like trying to like save us. I don't know. Because they thought like some of us went like mainstream public school once we hit high school because the Christian school we were at was starting to dissolve. That they were just like, oh, they're gonna turn the kids gay. We got to keep them safe. We got to keep them, we got to help protect them from the indoctrination of the school district, which is freaking ridiculous because nobody was being indoctrinated to be gay in our school district. It was a conservative school district, but like whatever.
What about trans?
No, absolutely not. None of
Okay.
my teachers use my pronouns. Like,
You're like, no.
yeah, they wouldn't even like, they were just like, you're using the women's restroom. And then I just had to stop using the restroom because the girls were like, we don't want Casey in there with us because this is just uncomfortable. So I just couldn't use the bathroom at school. So
Why
like
did
they
the
were not
girls not want
supportive
you
of
in
it.
there?
Because I was on testosterone and they were getting
Oh, okay,
uncomfortable with
okay.
me. Yeah, my senior year. So like near the end, like I just had to like hold it the entire day.
No, that's not good.
Or go into the nurse's office where the nurse would proselytize me because she was a Christian lady and was like, I need to save your soul. And I was like, I'm not doing this. So I would just like leave 3 periods in because like I had 3 classes and it was fine. But like when I got to high school, that was where like the homophobic takes really ratcheted up. And it was, like the gay people are abominations. They're akin to pedophiles. They are pedophiles. They are rapists. They are unsafe to have around the same sex. And just
This was
all
stuff
of
your
this.
church was saying?
Yeah, specifically our youth pastor. And we would get these lectures like in youth group and like you need to protect yourself with you need to don the armor of God. Oh, I just
Oh,
learned
the
I got
armor.
the armor of
Yeah.
God. But also like you couldn't have gay friends because they would turn you gay,
Yeah.
and when I say like, oh, you can't do this because it'll turn you gay, I think of the Alex Jones clip. It was like the chemicals are putting in the water, it's turning the freaking frogs gay. But there were some people, I think that clip circulated, and there were some people that are like, they are putting chemicals in the water.
They
It might be
agree
turning.
completely. Yeah. I have to say my mom would I think I don't know because I haven't talked to her in a very long time, but I have a feeling she would be totally on par with Alex on a lot of stuff, same
Yeah.
kind of environment.
And like it basically like, being gay is a choice. It is a sin. You're indulging in sin. You are being predatory. Like that was the other thing that like so like heterosexuality expression of that when it was within like a monogamous like marriage, situation was fine, or with the like, in courtship to prepare for marriage was fine. So consensual monogamous heterosexuality was okay. But then if you take that, kind of same level or same expectation, like that same situation, monogamous, but homosexual, it was always considered rape. Always. It was always considered predatory. So any homosexual desire was automatically considered predatory. Meanwhile, heterosexual desire was not considered predatory most of the time.
Okay.
But also it was a choice, and also they were all child molesters, which for somebody that has a pedophile as a dad, that kind of hits a little bit home, because basically hearing subconsciously that like you're the same thing as your father that is in prison for being a pedophile is, pretty rough.
Yeah. Ugh. I'm just nodding along because I heard all the same things. Like
Yeah,
pretty
literally.
much it's just like, textbook situation. Um,
Oh, my favorite one too is that like our youth pastor, it was the second youth pastor, because I now I'm remembering I had two youth pastors, and like the one that was kind of off the rails, he was like called by God to leave the church. Basically he was going to get fired because he was getting too crazy even for our church, and they were like, okay, you've literally endangered the youth too many times on mission trips. Like we got lost in Philadelphia, like on like a mission trip to go proselytize the homeless people of Philadelphia, I guess. And he had also gotten lost multiple times with kids, like, middle schoolers, going to New York City to proselytize the homeless. Because it was never in soup kitchens, never working in projects. It was literally just going out on the street and handing
just
out pamphlets.
preaching to people. Yeah.
Exactly. Saving their souls. But like he had gotten lost so many times, and like we got stuck near like a shooting that was happening like in Philly in like a really rough neighborhood. with like the boarded up windows and so on. And he
Oh,
just like stopped the car and he's just like, I'm gonna go out and ask for directions. And there was another adult in the car. It was like, fuck you are. Like, no, we're not doing this.
oh my
Um,
God.
I mean, we got ourselves removed from that situation, and then you tried to proselytize an Indian man in a Dunkin' Donuts at 7 a.m. And we're just like, Caleb, can we please go home? This is so yeah. But like our church was like, okay, this is too much. And then finally he was like, Jesus, God has called me to the field. I need to go proselytize the people in the Philippines. And so
Oh
he did.
no.
He
He doesn't
prepared.
know what he's
He
getting
prepared.
into. Those people are crazy, crazy Catholics.
Yeah. Well,
They're gonna preach to you.
he went to the Philippines, and that was a whole adventure in itself. But he was called away, so we got a new youth pastor that was slightly more tame. But he was like, Islam. I don't like Islam, but they did something right by executing homosexuals. I think that's a pretty fitting thing.
Oh my God. So when did you start to kind of realize that you had like same-sex attraction, like you were attracted to
Around
other
14,
girls?
15.
Okay.
Like when I actually put names to it, honestly, I've had girl crushes since I was like 7 or 8. In fact, the first crush that I can ever remember was Taylor Swift when I was 7. Yeah, no, it was back in country music days. Country music
Yeah.
days. Teardrops on
Okay.
my guitar made me feel some type of way.
My first, yeah, I had lots of little crushes too, and especially on teachers, which inappropriate, but anyways, uh, but my first like real solid crush, and it was even a little sexual, was around 9, although I did start puberty a little bit early. I was kind of starting at 9 and getting ramped up, and it was on a girl who was around 13 or 14. So she was already a little bit more mature, and I
Mhm.
was just like, oh my God, you are the most beautiful creature ever, and your breasts are lovely. Um, but even then, even that young, kind of having those feelings, like I didn't feel like that was it's like I didn't put two and two together that all the homosexuals they were talking about was me.
Mhm.
I was just like, because those feelings didn't feel wrong. They didn't feel bad. They felt good. They felt normal, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I was, 16 and 17 that it really became strong, that I was like, oh no, I am getting just like crush after crush after crush on girls. Like almost every girl I come across, I'm just ridiculous,
Yeah.
obviously not doing anything about it and really trying to hide it, but knowing it's there. And I was still very, very, very deep in the church and religion. And my mom was a raging homophobe. Uh, like she basically, so there's this one thing she did one time, and it was a bit scarring. She got super drunk and she started a fight with her sister. And I was always trying to take care of my mother. I was the eldest, and I was always the one trying to calm her down and take care of her because she's just crazy. Yes, she's super religious, but also super drunk. Nice. Anyway, so I got her to leave her sister's house, and we were driving around, and she was driving, and we parked somewhere, and I was just trying to get her to calm down because she was just completely in a rage. We're sitting there, and it was late night, and some group of people came out of one of the restaurants or whatever, and she's like, they're gay, they're homosexuals. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then she started going off on all this thing about how they come out at night and they congregate in the dark because they're doing wrong things. They don't want anybody to see them. She's pointing. And so then even from then on further, if we were out in public and she saw a lesbian, she'd point them out. She'd be like, that's a lesbian.
My
And
mom
she,
did the exact same thing, literally the exact same thing. Or like she would be talking about somebody like in a story, and she'd be like, "Oh, and it's a gay man," and then proceed to insult them, and then be like, hey, the gay didn't have to do anything with it. And finally, I called her out one day. I'm like, if it didn't have anything to do with it, you wouldn't have mentioned it.
yeah,
You would just talked about how shitty of a person they are. That you wouldn't have qualified it by saying, "And they're gay."
yeah. And so it's interesting because it's like, if you're a gay teenager and you have a parent who is basically doing these things, that is traumatizing as hell. Like you're already getting real fucked up in the head over that shit. And that's not even taking into consideration the church that's also doing this. That's not taking into consideration the rest of society that uses lesbians and gay men as a punchline. That's not considering that, like, when I finally came out at around 19, 20, I got flat told I was not to come to any family events anymore because I could not be around the kids, because obviously I would molest them because that's what gay people did. And it's like, it was just damaging as hell.
Yeah, when I mean, I came out to my mom at like 15. It was like at a noodles and company, but I did it because I was under the impression that I had to be transparent, that this was a transgression. This was something that was wrong with me and I was sinning, and that we needed to have open line of communication because that was basically how our family worked. And it's kind of how the family dynamic everywhere works. They like across extended family, they're all very transparent. Like all of my aunts and uncles and cousins and like their family, they all have one Prime account, like Amazon Prime account, and they all use it, but they're all constantly looking at what the other person's ordering. Hey, I saw you ordered this. Like like email chains back and forth that very like transparent with each other, to the point where like my oldest cousin got married and like his sister brought a plus one. And originally it was like, oh yeah, this is just my friend. And then she got a little tipsy and then admitted that she had been dating him for 6 months. That was like a big deal. And the family was mad because she didn't tell anybody. Well, she told the cousins, but she didn't tell like any of the extended like adults.
So no
Um,
privacy.
no privacy whatsoever. So like I came out at 15 because I felt like I had to. It was after church. And we were in a noodles and company.
And I imagine
Um,
you also maybe felt guilty.
Oh, absolutely.
Where
I
you already
felt
feel
guilty.
like,
Like
yeah,
I was crying and my mom was crying too because she was like, this is horrible. I mean, she didn't say this was horrible, but she's like, this is a lot and I don't know how I'm going to cope with this. But then after that, I could not be alone with other girls one on one because she was afraid. And the attitude was that there was a fear that I would assault them. I was 15. I was sexually abused. I was
yeah.
essentially, I called myself asexual. I literally said, like in my evaluation records for transition, that Casey never wants to have sex with anybody ever. Like that's what
Ever.
it said. And so like I was so timid. I wasn't, I had trouble talking to people just in general. Like I wasn't gonna do anything, but because of the fact that I outed myself as gay, oh well, gay people are pedophiles, gay people are sexual offenders just by the nature of them being gay. And they're automatically attracted to everybody of the same sex, everybody, all the time.
Yeah.
I
No.
hate that whenever you come
No.
out to somebody like
No.
another woman and they're just like, oh, well, I'm not interested in it. That's not my thing. And I'm like, I have standards. Like,
Now, so this is a little bit of a side funny, but have you noticed that it's the women who respond the most negatively that you would never ever be interested in? Like
yeah, I think so.
I have had the women that I have come across in my life who've been the most disgusted, repulsed, and sure I was into them were the ones that I would be like, oh, please don't flatter yourself. Like you, I would no, not with a 10-foot pole, hun. Never. I would be celibate before I'd be with you.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have like too many
Well, you're young still,
experiences.
so
Yeah, true. No, it'll come, it'll happen.
it might happen.
I
I mean, I
yeah.
hope it doesn't, because people being mean and rude is just never a very positive experience. Obviously, it always hurts a little bit, even when you don't know them well, right? Because you're being rejected. I mean, at the core, the reason that homophobia is so damaging and so traumatic is because it cuts to the core of what it means to be human. And what it means to be human is to be social. We are social creatures. We live, breathe, and grow up in a soup of humanity. And when that soup that you're used to being a part of rejects you, that is just like that cuts just so deeply. And I wish that like that was really taken into consideration more, just by like people's understanding about how humans work, especially in psychology, for example,
Mhm.
would be a very good place to kind of think about these things. Um, so how did you end up slipping into, like, what made you start identifying as trans?
So
Because you came
interesting.
out as gay first, right?
Yeah, I did. And then I had like a girlfriend that my mom didn't know about. So it was kind of a sequence of events that led up to me finding trans stuff online. And this was also used as justification that I was like a true transsexual or true trans, because I had actually been starting to say to myself and in private and to friends that I wanted to be male and I wanted to be a boy even before I even knew what trans was, because I just thought it was cross dressing. Like the only thing I knew about trans was like Caitlyn Jenner and that was bad. And he was just like, I was told that he was like a gay pedophile that was cross dressing as a woman to like diddle kids. That was what my church told me. So I didn't know anything else. I
Which
didn't know
is
what trans was.
seems inaccurate from what I know.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
yeah, but whatever. Jesus freaks are gonna do what they're gonna do. Um, but I had this girlfriend for a couple of months. I mean, we really didn't do much of anything, but like, we, dated for a couple months, and then my mom found out about it, and I was already in a really rough spot mentally. She found out about it and was basically like, "You're grounded. You're not allowed to see her. You're not allowed to be alone with anybody ever again. I'm locking this down. You can't ride the bus. I'm going to pull you out of extracurriculars." And I just had a meltdown because I was already like unstable. And long and short, I ended up putting myself in inpatient psych in part to get myself away from her and that environment, because I was going to be stuck in the house with her for 2 weeks, unable to
Mm,
drive, unable to go anywhere, and she was going to like roast the shit out of me because of this thing. Because like she went through my phone, she saw my text, she saw the messages I sent, every
mm,
single one. And so when I was in intensive outpatient or like the day hospital, which is like, okay, you were an inpatient, you were living there, and then they basically have like the 5 day a week program where you're there like all day and like doing school and therapy. We did like post secret. So like it's like this post-it card or postcard that you can send in to like a website called like Post It Secret or Post Secret, where they publish like these anonymous artsy postcards that people put their secrets on. And so mine, I put on there, I said, "I hate men, but I wish I could be one so liking girls wasn't so freakish or abnormal." And
that
I had
sums it
already
up,
been,
doesn't it?
yeah, and I had also while I was inpatient, because part of that too had to do with like the flashbacks from the abuse, because I had found my court records because I was sexually abused as a child, and I had found the court records from it that detailed what happened and my testimony. I found them online,
Ugh.
and that triggered flashbacks for me that I literally said while I was inpatient. Again, in my medical records from the place that I went for the gender clinic, if I was a boy, the abuse wouldn't have happened. I firmly believe that if I was male, my dad wouldn't have abused me, which of course my mom, being my mom, said, "Honey, your dad would have raped you if you were a man or a boy anyways." Which like that's not something that you
I
tell
can't
a
even.
child who is 16. Literally, this was on a visit in the psych ward. Like
Oh
she was
my,
visiting me in the psych ward.
I can't. I can't with your mom. It's like, I just can't. I'm just like, oh my God.
Well, no, she's very blunt, extremely blunt, but like, so like those were like two instances where like I was saying that I wanted to be a boy before I even knew what trans was, but it was either to protect myself and or to escape homophobia. Those were the two reasons. I didn't want to actually like embody like maleness and like go through the physiological changes and like, I didn't think I had like a man soul. I just kind of wanted people to leave me alone. I wanted to be able to do my thing and live my life without men oogling me and without people, calling me a dyke and saying I'm an abomination.
But is
Um,
this your understanding in hindsight?
um,
Which is, this is tricky because like during the time you're existing in this place, are you actually believing that you should have been a boy or should have been male? Are you believing
so
that? Like, it just seems to make sense.
Well, actually, it wasn't until May that my thinking shifted. So I've been reflecting back on it because I remember like liking or being okay with the fact that I was a girl, not loving my body, but I also had body image issues. Also had an undiagnosed eating disorder that, kind of just went on for years and years until it was diagnosed well into transition. But that was another thing. So like that was also contributing to body image issues. But like I didn't imagine myself as like an actual man. I just like conceptualize myself maybe as like someone who cross-dressed well enough that people at first glance thought she was a guy, and then like people would just kind of leave me alone because of
Hmm.
that. But then it wasn't until around April May of like 2017, so like all the stuff that happened before was like in December of 2016. It wasn't until like April May 2017 where I think I entered into Google something like I'm a girl and I don't want to be a girl, because I was like, what do I do with this information? Like, gay is not covering it because I didn't, even though now speaking to a lot of gay people, gay and lesbian people, like gender nonconformity for a lot of us is a very common thing. We have a lot of shared experiences, but I didn't know that at the time. Typing in I'm a girl and I don't want to be a girl, or I'm a girl and I want to be a boy, trans stuff popped up. And that's
Yeah.
where I saw medical transition. And the first, like, that's when I started to really latch onto the idea that I was meant to be male and that I could actually transform my body and have control over something, and that people would leave me alone if I did it.
I feel like you've said people would leave me alone a lot. And I get the sense that that's a bit of a key component. You just wanted to exist and be left alone,
Yeah,
right?
and even like I can objectively look back and say that even after I, drank the gender Kool-Aid and thought that I had a man soul, unironically, and that I was meant to be male because of all these signs, and like how could you not? You have all the hallmark signs of a trans kid, and the dysphoria throughout childhood
Hmm.
and so on. that I remember watching a New York Times op-ed, Transgender in Love and at War, um, which was like a little video done on the transgender military couple, Logan and Layla Ireland. And I don't know if you've seen pictures of Logan Ireland, who's the FTM, but Logan is jacked,
Oh
fucking
yeah,
jacked.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I remember seeing pictures of Logan and going, if I look like that, no one would mess with me.
No
And
one would.
that's what
Yeah,
started it. That's
yeah.
what started it.
I, the reason I pick up on the I want to be left alone, because that was like a key component to my transition as well. Even though it happened much later, it was a key component. I wanted to just be left alone. I got so much shit for being a butch lesbian. And I had gotten so much shit starting very, very early because I was a tomboy and gender nonconforming and was being called a boy in elementary school by my peers. Even though my mom never let me, like your mom, never let me dress in boys' clothes or cut my hair, right? Sometimes she even did my hair, which, oh my God, I hated that.
Oh,
But yes, I know, especially for picture day, which was not a pleasant experience. Um, so no, I didn't look like a boy, look like a boy. I wasn't wearing boys' clothes or anything, yet I was still getting called a boy. I was still getting called that. I wanted to be a boy. I thought I was a boy and getting made fun of by my peers. So I'm like, what are they picking up on that I don't understand? I didn't understand why. And this is just a theme that's continued through my whole life. And there comes a point where there's only so much you can take. And then I had other mental health issues that came into play, but I just wanted to be left alone. I just wanted to live my life. I didn't want to be seen anymore, and that was such a, a belief system of, believing that I was meant to be, that should have been born male. I mean, although there is some differences between our stories and the way you understood your sexuality versus the gender stuff early versus me. Obviously in 93 or 92, 93, there was no gender stuff pretty much anywhere on media or whatever. And I had very little access. There was no big internet like there is now. I don't even know if the internet was, I think the internet kind of existed, but not big. We didn't have social media, none of that stuff. Rarely had TV. But starting very young, even at that age, because I already started to kind of imagine and pretend I was male in order to facilitate being with girls or women, because I didn't understand, how do I, as a female, as a girl or a woman, be with another woman? I don't understand that.
I did the same thing. I've talked to so many people. Also, I'm
When
working
you say
on,
people, is this lesbians you've
yeah,
spoken to about this?
lesbians, and also
Okay.
detrans, like not regular lesbians, trans identified lesbians and
Okay.
detrans lesbians, lesbians across the board. We've all talked about how we imprinted on the men in male female romances because that's the only way we could see ourselves getting with the girl. Because
Right.
we have no other option. We don't have any other representation, especially if you're more masculine leaning, if you're butch gender non-conforming, you fit more of the stereotypes of the guy and the guy girl relationship anyway.
Absolutely. And the reason this is so easy to slip into is because our society is so gender split. Like, boys and girls are majorly split up by the way we're supposed to look. Our clothes are completely different. Our hairstyle is supposed to be completely different. I really believe that if there wasn't such this huge split, we wouldn't have so much of the issues we have, like with the trans stuff. I mean, trans stuff isn't just something that fell out of the sky like so many people like to think it is. Trans stuff comes right out of our own society. It's just an extreme version of what we all have been brought up with and taught, that boys and girls behave, act different, and look different. And yeah, but I didn't know that that was a common experience either until much later. And I had a lot of shame around that too, because like there's so much shame around, first of all, being attracted to other girls or women, and then there's a lot of shame around wanting to be a man, because I thought, why do I want to be a man? That's fucked up and weird. But I didn't understand, like, that I was just trying to find my place, and there was no representation or no mirror to look in to see myself reflected back from somebody out in society.
And the other thing too is that, so like when I first started identifying as trans, I identified as non-binary. Essentially, what I wanted to do is I wanted to be a butch lesbian, but like under the guise of non-binary because like I couldn't just do it as a woman, like according to my surroundings. And my mom said, "Well, there's only male and female. Pick a side." And I didn't want to do the feminine stuff. I didn't want to have long hair. I didn't want to dress as a godly
But
woman. I didn't want to get.
she associated male and female with the dress and the hair, right? Not
Mhm.
the actual biological sex of your body.
Yeah, and like, secondary sex characteristics, well, I guess not that, but like mannerisms and behavior and stuff. But she was like, there's only male and female, pick a side. And I didn't want to do what the church represented to me, or what they gave to me as the epitome of like holy femininity or godly femininity. And I wanted to be masculine. I trended masculine anyway, so I picked a side. I picked male. So it was an outlet for me to be able to do the things that I was not allowed to do unless I declared myself as male. So like I wasn't allowed to shop in the men's section until finally like we got an email from the gender clinic. We had an appointment scheduled. My mom's like, fine, I guess you might be trans. You can go get your button down shirts. Literally stuff pretty similar to this. Like I
Mm-hmm.
dressing how I always wanted to dress, which was, androgynously or in some men's clothes. But I wasn't allowed to do that. I wasn't allowed to cut my hair until I said I was male, even though I had wanted to do it for years, but I wasn't
Yeah.
allowed to because, well, that's not something that women do. That's not something straight women do. And you're supposed to look straight, even though at that point, my mom knew I wasn't.
Yeah. So there was also a lot of shame around looking gay because then they knew
Absolutely.
you were gay.
Well, and it's really interesting now because like I had like a little phase where I tried to be like a little bit more stylish. And then that was kind of slapped down by my mom. And now, like the way that I dress, she's like, I know that you're a woman. I recognize that you're a woman and all that stuff. But frankly, you just look like a gay man. And I just need you to know that people are going to read you as a gay man. And you're probably going to get homophobic slurs because they think you're a gay man, which is ironic because like
No,
I'm,
you'll
I'm
get them. You could get them just as easily as a butch lesbian. It's okay.
yeah, well, but it's interesting because like I'm dressing like more butch, but she's interpreting it as gay man.
Gay men would be horrified to hear this, by the way, because it's a long-standing thing that butch women's style and gay men's style is not exactly the same.
No, they're not the same. That's absolutely not the same. Like I went to like a little Pride festival for the first time, never been to Pride until this year, which is ironic that like I didn't do it while I was trans or anything like that. I waited till I was detrans and the enemy. And I went
Mm,
with a friend, and it was funny because like everybody else I could tell who some of like, the run-of-the-mill lesbians are, some older butch women. But everybody else, it was pretty ambiguous. I'm like, I can't tell who's gay, I can't tell who's trans unless they're wearing the flag. But the only people I could tell, as a matter of fact, almost all the time were the gay men, based on
oh,
how they dressed and how they acted, and also they
yeah,
congregated in their little groups. But like
yeah.
everybody else I couldn't tell, but I was just like, well, I know who the gay men are. But then I was also reflecting because I'm like, they're, my mom says I dress like, I don't dress like them, I don't look like them. Like, what the hell are you
No,
talking about?
yeah, that's interesting. Um, so do you think it would have made a difference if you had seen and knew that butch lesbian existed? Or do you think
Absolutely.
like if the butch lesbians existed alongside the trans stuff, what's the decision that could have been made? I know it's such very hypothetical, but
Honestly, I think having some form of representation or role model would have made a world of difference for me. The other thing too is that I didn't have any trans people around me either. So
mm,
like all of it was on social media. Like I really haven't like interacted with trans people all that much. The first time was when I was at the Philadelphia Trans Wellness Conference in 2019, and I didn't have any long form conversations. The first actual conversation I had with a trans person was when I was interviewed by Buck Angel last year. So
mm,
like, almost 5 years into medical transition at that point, and that was my first time really ever talking to another trans person. Versus some people, they have support groups and they have friends and like people that they talk to, and they're surrounded and like validated and all of that stuff. But I was completely stealth, but like also like I just didn't have any butch representation. Hell, I didn't have any gay representation. The most gay representation I had was I had a middle school band teacher who at some point basically let it slip that he had a male partner, and that was a big to do. The school
mhm.
district was like, it's fine, but he's a middle school teacher, and he got so much harassment from the students. Like he was physically threatened by
Oh,
students.
oh my God.
And like this,
It's probably be surprising to a lot of people to hear that this still goes on today and
yeah.
exists.
And like the school kind of was like, okay, we'll protect you and so on. Um, but like when the 2016 election happened, of course, like at that point he was like, well, everybody knows, like I have a male partner, like it's fine. And then like they adopted a kid together, and it was like this whole thing. But like he got like homophobic messages left on his desk, basically saying that Trump was coming to hang him. Like that was, but that was, I
That's
mean,
not
he,
unhinged at all.
no, it's not one middle scores who are kind of little psychotic little shits. Because they're at that
That's true.
special in between
Middle
stage.
schoolers are unhinged by nature.
Yeah, but really unhinged. But like, and he basically kind of did his best to not act like a stereotypical gay man. But there was, I guess, like some tells, like he wasn't like super macho or anything, but he was trying to just be like this stereotypical run-of-the-mill teacher that happened to be gay. But that was my only representation.
Mhm.
um so like gay man, butch lesbian, you can kind of relate, but you can't fully relate. If I had had more, even just like lesbian representation, but especially butch lesbian, gender nonconforming female representation, I think we'd probably be in a different position. Like we would be in a different situation. I would be in a different situation today.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because like I had some representation. I had a community to a certain extent early on that didn't have any like I mean, yeah, there's always been a few trans folks in the gay community because there has always been gay people who transitioned. Like that's just the way it's been. But like, very, very few. Wasn't like a mainstream thing or anything like that. But so I did have some of that representation and some of that, I guess, normalcy of just regular gay folks. And still, when I heard about being a trans man, I just fell for it so fast. Um, and I think it's really just because I just internalized all of that hate that I got and all of that shame, and really felt like, well, and also because I was always called out for my behavior and called out and told that my behavior was boyish or male like or like a male, I
Yeah.
really then believed that must, like, the minute I heard about trans stuff, I was like, oh, this explains it. Like I do have the brain of a male and the body of a female.
Yeah. I mean, well, you've been acting like a man all of your life, according to the people around you.
Yeah,
Now it makes sense because you actually have the mind of a man.
yeah. It fits so well. And like, I don't know, I think that's why so many gay people fall for it. I mean, it's very, very close there. I mean, gay folks have always had a weird, complicated relationship with what we call gender, which is an expression or behavior or whatever you want to say it is. I think it gets real wound up in here. It's hard to break those pieces apart and figure out if there is such a thing as a true trans person, what does that look like? What does that mean versus what it feels like to be a gender nonconforming homosexual? Yeah, where's that split? And for me, what I'm looking at right now is it's very all blurred. I don't think anybody can tell me what it means.
I mean, honestly, I think one of the key differences is the willingness to believe. Um,
Uh,
and I don't know, it's just one of those things. Again, I think back to my evangelical days. Um, they talk about planting the seed, for somebody's faith, that you kind of plant little seeds, and maybe the first one won't take, and the second one won't take, or the third one won't take, but one of these days the seed is going to sprout and it's going to grow, and their faith is going to blossom, and it's just going to be the right time, and they're going to find Jesus and God. And and then some people end up walking away from that. But I think the same thing is true with trans as well, because obviously not every single gender nonconforming homosexual is transitioning. A lot of them, I mean, not a lot of them, but there definitely are a lot of gender nonconforming homosexuals that are transitioning. But the difference between them versus the people who don't is that the seeds that were planted by society, were given the opportunity to grow for whatever reason. There was just like a magical statement or something, some sort of phrase, some sort of experience that just made it click for them, that allowed it to grow. But a lot of the foundational experiences in childhood, adolescence, young adulthood, the messaging we receive from society are the same. It's
yeah.
just somehow there is, like, they believed and other people didn't. Or like us, we believed and we were believers. We were true believers. We actually lived it, did it, believed it, and then came out the other side.
Do you believe that there are some people who have, you can refuse to answer the question, of course. Do you believe there's true gender dysphoria and then the fake gender dysphoria?
I am unsure
Yeah.
because honestly, I mean, it's pretty hard to have faith in anything related to gender when you hear how batshit crazy things are going.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true.
because I'm like, or like the origins of like transsexualism and all of that stuff, and like Magnus Hirschfeld, and like when you hear about some of that stuff, I'm like, okay, have we just been going crazy this entire time? Like, is this entire thing? And like Alfred Kinsey and like just the Harry Benjamin and John Money and like learning about all of that stuff just a little bit, I've learned I'm like, okay, so this has just been off the rails since the beginning. This has always been crazy.
Yeah.
People talk about the old days of how it used to be normal and it used to be controlled and it was very scientific
Oh
and
yeah,
medical. I'm like, no, it's
it
never,
never
like it
was.
literally never was. Like we're just kind of flying by the seat of our pants the entire time.
Do you know how, well, you probably do. You know how many like what we call GCs or even the therapists that are working to like help detransitioners still believe that shit?
They
Like
do, and
that
I
believe
think
that there was a better gatekeeping time. I'm like, was there though? I mean, yeah, there was more gatekeeping, but my option, and I tried to transition, actually my first time attempting to transition was 2002. There was gatekeeping. And you know what that, and I went to a gender specialist too. And that gender specialist, who had had a long career as a gender specialist, mind you, 20 plus years, she basically gave me two options: transition, live with it. That's it. You have gender dysphoria, you hate your body, you hate your sex, blah, blah, blah. You have all these things. Transition, you'll feel better, just live with it. Well, now that's not an option. That's like telling somebody who's in pain, like, say your hand's mangled or something. They're like, well, just live with the pain or have it cut off. But they forgot to tell you that maybe physical therapy would help.
yeah, or take opiates, or
I
just
don't
live
know.
with it.
Like, it's like even during these, better gatekeeping days, I don't know how many were really offering that much of an alternative or really helping people with gender dysphoria.
Well, yeah, I think I haven't studied it too much, but I definitely want to look into it, like the old standards of care, WPATH standards of care, and kind of reading stories about like what medical transition looked like in this mysterious gatekeeping. But based on what I've seen so far, it just seems that it took them longer to get from point A to point B. They just had to live socially, or like socially transition longer than
Mhm.
somebody like me had to, or somebody in the 2010s would have to. Because like there are even people like I've talked to people that transitioned in the late 2000s, early 2010s that actually went a lot faster than I did.
Oh,
um,
interesting.
which is surprising because even 2017, all right, the wheels were starting to fall off the wagon by that point, by 2017. But like I talked to somebody in 2013 that they were like fully transitioned, like from like first appointment to surgery within like 5 months.
Okay, so here's this is what interesting, and this is what really pertains to lesbians specifically, is that lesbians transitioning, especially butch lesbians transitioning, is not nothing old. Like this was happening in the 80s too. Obviously, this was happening much lower numbers and in usually just big metropolitan areas, but it was happening. San Francisco especially is like the flashpoint for most of this. And then though, the first big wave of trans men came from the late 90s and early 2000s. That was the wave I was caught in when I was about 21. That was the first big wave. And I've run across articles that were like a New York Times article written in 2006. It's another one of the San Francisco papers wrote something in 2002, I believe, talking about this phenomenon of butch lesbians transitioning. And I think it's so here we have a bunch of women who were pretty easily transitioning. And I would imagine that probably most of them did go through the regular care system to do so. I can't imagine they all were doing it illegally. Especially since I know that there is a LGBT clinic that was founded in the Castro district in the 90s that was founded to serve LGBT youth that started transitioning teenagers in the 90s. And so I actually know a woman who got testosterone, straight woman actually, who got testosterone in I want to say around 2001 or 2002 from there. She was homeless and I think she had just turned 18, or maybe she was even underage still.
This is not the biggest problem. Like, wait, a homeless 18-year-old, here's your testosterone. It's going to make you feel
Absolutely. She
better.
she was homeless for years. She was homeless pretty much the whole time through her transition. She rode the trains. Yeah. But it also autistic. So it's like, when it comes to the LGBT community, this shit has been here for a while, and it's our own. It's a little different though, but it has been in our own community. And I really wish that as gay people, as homosexuals who have a lot of these similar experiences, we would look at this with a critical eye and be like, is this helping us? Is this helping our community? Is this helping our youth? Is this helping our people who are in pain? Is this because we all have experienced so much homophobia? How, like, I don't think we want to recognize how much that's damaged us as people. Being told that you are subhuman.
Literally, I mean, you can only tell. And I had like a little conversation, or I tried to have a conversation with somebody in particular today on Twitter that was basically saying that, like, some of us like transition because of sexual trauma. It's never because of homophobia in the church. It's never because of that. It's always because of something else, or like sin or whatever. And I said, you tell a gender nonconforming lesbian that she is subhuman enough times, you call her a man enough times, you call her an abomination enough times, and compare her to a pedophile enough times, she will break eventually.
Yeah.
And if this is an option that she has to escape and to look normal, she'll take it. She might take it.
And she'll rationalize the shit out of it too.
Yeah. So like in my family, like my mom was like, okay, well, this is the remedy, because this just means that God made you as a straight man, and this is how you got there. She also unironically called me a eunuch, which is interesting. She was like, you're just like a eunuch with extra steps, like a biblical eunuch. So like you're a servant to women and children. So you're safe to be around. It was interesting. So it was interesting because I wasn't safe to be around women as a lesbian. But when I transitioned, still a woman taking testosterone, having had top surgery, now it was safe for me to be around women. In fact, it was safer for me to be around women because I wasn't a man with my sexual desires. That was the rationalization.
You were a man with your sexual desires?
I wasn't a real man with sexual desires. I was like a man with extra steps.
I'm confused, man.
I
can't follow this
confused.
logic.
It's
not logic. That's the problem.
No, it doesn't make sense. That's the problem. It doesn't make sense.
Oh my God.
But like in some respects, like as like I was compared to a castrated male, and that I could not sexually assault anybody because I did not have a penis. Because that's totally how that works.
Well, then how do you sexually assault if you're a lesbian? You don't have a penis either.
Well, they don't ask those questions, Carol. It's the evil gays.
Okay.
But that's why it doesn't make sense. But that was how it was viewed, and it was basically like this was just like God's way of making me straight. Was I just needed to go through this journey, But even like after we had left the church, it was still rationalized under that light. But again, you tell somebody that they're an abomination, you tell them that they're subhuman, that they're wrong, that they're a freak, that they're a sexual deviant enough times, and you give them an out, they will take it.
Yeah. And sometimes it doesn't have to be that extreme. Like we're talking about more extreme homophobia coming out of the church and families and stuff. But like some of the more, I guess some of the more challenging issues for me was just day-to-day life of getting, looked at sideways, or, told that I had to, getting called sir, and then somebody like backing out of the sir once I spoke because they knew I was a woman, and then like everybody looking at me because I was misgendered, and oh, look at that freakish woman, like, oh, women being uncomfortable with me in the bathrooms, giving me shit in bathrooms. When I was 22, newly out, I was at the movies with my sister, and I went into the women's restroom, and we used the restroom, and I was washing my hands at the sink, and this mother came out of the stalls with a couple of her little girls, and she saw me in the mirror and literally went and grabbed her kids and put them behind her.
Yeah.
What does that fucking do to you? Like, what does that like? This wasn't from the church or personal people. This is just day-to-day living for me, and it was very difficult.
Now, see, this is interesting because, again, juxtaposing like my experience with yours, up until like very, very, very recently, and even now it's a little bit in flux, I didn't live adult life as a gender nonconforming woman. I lived it socially as male. So I didn't have those experiences as much. And like when I did transition, like, of course I was in this weird in-between phase before I was like passing enough as male, where people would kind of just be like, all right, looks like guy. Because I basically like went off to college and sequestered myself away until I passed well enough. But like, it would be really interesting now that like I'm off of hormones for like over 8 months. I am starting to get ma'am a couple places, or people are saying this person. So I am entering ambiguous territory. It will be interesting to see, especially if I do start using women's restrooms again, which I just try to avoid gendered or sex restrooms at this point, because I don't want a Karen coming at me with a cell phone videotaping me. Really don't, because that happened to
No,
a
I
friend of
know.
a friend.
I honestly, if I can find the family bathrooms or a single stall, like a single room bathroom, I'll go for that. I don't like to go use the public women's restrooms.
Yeah, but like I wouldn't be surprised if I receive some of that same treatment. As I progress in my detransition, the more time I'm off hormones, the more time I'm ambiguous, and then people can detect my sex. I wouldn't be surprised if I start experiencing that. But it was I wasn't I never experienced that as an adult in the adult
Yeah.
world.
Yeah. I think it obviously was a driving force to transition, but I also think it helped me in detransition because I'd already lived it as a dyke. I knew what to expect. I knew what it was. And after going through the transition stuff and realizing that I had just like, twisted myself in all these knots to try to like make other people comfortable, basically. I came out the other side just going, really not giving a fuck for about 98% of the time. I don't give a fuck. There are times where you're still like, ugh, for the most part though, I don't care. I don't care. I don't, it's just, and I wish I could have been that way before. Like, I wish I could have had help to like find the ability to do that before, instead of having to go through all of this stuff and remove body parts and change my body to get to this point.
Yeah, and there's some people that try and like, paint it as like gender journey and say, well, maybe you just needed to do all of this to discover that you were a woman all along. And I'm like, no woman should have to
Oh,
go get her breasts removed to figure out that she was a woman.
yeah. I mean, it's
I mean,
that it's that weird conversation where it's like, don't say we're mutilated, don't say we're ruined, that don't say that like our life's over. No, my life's very good now. I'm flourishing, I'm doing great. I'm not that bothered by, I went through my pain and my regret with my mastectomy, but honestly, it's not that big a deal to me anymore. It is what it is. But when that is not to say that it was extremely painful to go through this experience to come out the other side better. And was there an alternative to having to go through this painful experience? And no, when you call it a gender journey, I want to throw down with people who say that. I get so goddamn mad. I'm like, this was not a gender journey. This was not a journey. This was fucking like, this was a travel through the like,
the
levels of
gates of,
hell.
yeah,
Right?
yeah, Dante's Inferno. We're
Right? I was
going
trying
to
to
the
think of the
different.
book. I know I had to read it in college. Yeah, exactly. I mean, no, this is no journey someone should have to take to really accept themselves.
Well, because like it's interesting because the people that have like the people in real life who have told me, well, maybe this is like just part of a journey to figure out that you were a woman all along. They've all been women. Have said that, and
That's
like
interesting.
finally, like my mom like said that to me, and I was like, Mom, did you have to get a double mastectomy to discover that you were a woman? And she's like, well, no, of course not. And I'm like, should any woman have to get a double mastectomy to discover that she's a woman? And she's like, well, no. And I'm like, you just told me that I got a double mastectomy and took testosterone for 5 years to discover that I was a woman. Do you realize how fucked up that is? And she was like, oh, well, and it kind of made her think a little bit. Usually I'm not that blunt with people, but usually I'm just, it's,
I
yeah.
think you should be. You deliver it perfectly.
Oh, well, thank you. There's a time and place for being blunt. I'm trying to have more nuance, but there's certain
No, I
people that
know.
I
I
will
know.
just, yeah, because like one person was just like, well, if people with gender dysphoria, regardless of the cause, like if it, alleviates their distress, who are we to judge? And I was like, I just told you that people who are sexually assaulted as children or sexually abused as children transition to, because of their sexual trauma, and you're telling me that that is a viable coping mechanism. Well, when you put it that way, it doesn't sound that good, but if it helps them, why not? And I'm like, listen to what you're saying.
Lots of things help people that aren't good for them, though, right? Like alcohol. I can tell you alcohol was a very big help for me in my early days with my anxiety. It was very helpful with my socialization. It was very helpful with dealing with my depression. Um, but did not have the longevity I had hoped it would. It got me in a lot of trouble eventually, but it was helpful. So like, where is that line between hurting yourself to feel better and doing, and not doing that to feel, trying to find a healthier way to help yourself instead of that?
Yeah, and also like there's a difference in like medicine between like short-term versus long-term interventions. So like opioids, for instance. So for people that don't know, I'm a nursing student. I did a year of nursing clinicals and then had to withdraw because of health issues. I'm returning. So I have a little bit of experience of administering medications, patient education, etc. Like in the inpatient environment, if you're dealing with certain patients that are getting physical therapy and they have, chronic pain or they're post-op patients, maybe they have like a small prescription of an opioid like Oxycontin or whatever, like 5 milligrams fast acting, that the purpose is to get them up and moving, so, alleviate enough of the pain that they can do physical therapy so they can build up their endurance and stamina so they can leave the hospital. But they're not being given opioids long term. That's not the intention of giving them long term. Obviously, some people get them long term because physicians in the outpatient environment, like primary care doctors, will be like, oh, you're in pain, here's some oxy, like just take it, it's fine. And they
Yeah.
just don't care. But in that instance, it is something that is helpful in the short term, but it is not meant to be used in long term and will be detrimental in the long term. And I've heard some people try and argue that transition is the same thing, that maybe it's helpful in the short term. It helped you, or, I've had people tell me, well, it kept you from committing suicide. You probably would have killed yourself at that time if you hadn't transitioned. So it kept you alive. It did what it was supposed to do. Except this isn't like a drug that just comes out of your system. This is permanent.
Yeah.
My body is
There's
permanently
surgeries.
changed.
There's
Surgery,
surgeries involved here,
literally.
folks.
Yeah, like plastic surgery. I literally had body parts removed. There is no returning from that. It's
Yeah,
not like, and even with antidepressants, some of them have permanent side effects, but it's
it's
not like
true.
with certain drugs where you take them and they come out of your system and, after a little bit, you're fine. No, there are permanent physiological changes from these things. And even advertising them as a short-term fix is, it's just horrible medicine. It's not even medicine at the end of the day.
I will agree with that. So I think we're probably running up on an hour, if not more. I wasn't keeping super close lock on the time, but I don't want to make it too long because you know how people are. They're gonna tune out pretty soon.
Yeah,
Anyways.
they're gonna
They're
see
like,
like, oh
but
God.
anyways, it was really great having this conversation. Maybe we'll have more, maybe we won't, I don't, whatever. Maybe we'll have more different women on here if I can get them on here to talk to me. That
Yeah,
would be
definitely.
good. Is there anything you want to say? Like a last word? I'll give you the last word.
Oh gosh, you're putting me on the spot here.
Or like even like a point, something that like rubs you the wrong way and you're just like, man,
Oh,
listen.
okay. Okay. Um, Homophobia is absolutely a real thing. Religious homophobia is absolutely a real thing. I'm 22. I experienced it when I was 15, 16, 17 years old, so just a few years ago. And when all the people come into my comments and my YouTube comments, because for some reason I attract a lot of like Jesus crazies that tell me that, like, I need to pray to God, and that the fact that like they everybody thinks that I didn't have God in my life and that that's how I came to transition. I was the strongest in my faith as a Christian, as an evangelical Christian, when I found transition and medical transition. So when you tell me to go pray to God and all that stuff, I don't think people realize that homophobia is a thing, and some of us were extremely involved in church life. And it's, this isn't something from the 80s and 90s. This is happening in the 2010s and the 2020s. It is still alive and well today, and is still why a lot of people are transitioning, including the younger generation. We just don't talk about it a lot because of homophobia.
Yeah, right. Thank you. And thanks for coming on.
No problem. Thanks for having me.